All right, sports fans, today we're going to change oil in Dora the Explorer. And yeah, there's a lot of oil change videos out there, a lot of them probably on Ford Explorers. So this really isn't going to focus on that. What it's going to do is focus on the finer points of changing your oil. So it's just stuff that's going to make it easier. For example, you know what you want to do is you want to write down your date and mileage. I always take a piece of masking tape and just write those two things down. But the other things you want to do, you see, I write down right on the door rather than a piece of tape, because this information will always be valuable, the size wrench it takes and how many quarts of oil it takes. So I don't have to look that up every single time I come to change the oil on this vehicle. It turns out the oil drain plug on this unit is 16 millimeters, or else it's about 5/8. Okay, either one will work, because 5/8 is pretty close to 16 millimeters. I don't honestly know exactly what size it is out of those two. The one size I know it is not, it's not crescent wrench. If you're gonna use a crescent wrench on your oil drain plug, you might as well just take that drain plug right now. Just take it to the grinding wheel and just round that thing off and get it over with. In the old days, cars had pretty big drain plug nuts on it. You know, you could use a crescent wrench, but when you have these ones that are the size of a 5/8 wrench, a crescent wrench is going to round off and slip off. Now, like I said, I think it's 16 millimeter. Here's something else that kind of irritates me. I got these 3 socket sets out here just to show the point. Actually, it's 4. None of them have a 16 millimeter. They skip 16 millimeter. Don't ask me why, but they don't have it. But 5/8 will work fine. So just take a 5/8 wrench and that'll do a good job. Ideally, I think a 6-point socket would work good, even better than one of these 12-point box wrenches. But sometimes I got some box end wrenches with a 6-point. But what you want to do is you want to avoid stripping out your drain plug and rounding that off. Next, of course, you got to have a good way to get your vehicle up in the air. Ramps work pretty good on older cars and something with high ground clearance like an Explorer. One thing, if you're going to be changing your oil in the gravel, which I like to do because that way if I spill it, it's no big deal. No real mess to clean up. But as you can see, I have these pieces of plywood I put underneath each of my ramps, and that'll keep the ramp from sinking in the ground. And yeah, you really don't want to use ramps on soft ground or gravel. You probably want to have them on a hard surface like concrete or asphalt. But if you don't have that, put them on a sheet of plywood, and that'll keep them from sinking in. You don't want the vehicle to have the ramp sink in and then have the vehicle come down and crush you. Another thing too is when you drain your oil, you're going to have a place to put it. I like to have a designated oil pan. I have one just like it that I use for coolant. So the oil one I use only for oil, and the coolant I use only for coolant. And when I'm done with this oil drain pan, now what I do is I hang it up on a hanger on the wall and have it directed right down into a 5-gallon pail of waste oil. And that way you drain out all the oil. If you don't drain the oil out of these pans, they'll start collecting dust and bugs and dandelion seeds, and they just get really nasty. So it's well worth your time to keep them clean. If you keep that pan, very clean, if you're doing some job where you had to remove oil, but the oil isn't been used so much that it needs to be replaced, if those pans are clean, you have a chance of reusing that oil. Where if they're not totally spotless, you're going to have to put in new oil no matter what. And then as far as getting the oil in the car, there's various methods for doing it. You got funnels and adapters and spouts, and all these things are going to lead to varying degrees of disappointment. You can find out what works best in the car you're driving now, but you get a different kind of car, and just because the way things are arranged different, what worked for you on one car isn't going to work for you on the other. For lawnmowers, there's one thing that I thought would have been kind of handy. They sell these spouts, okay? And they got 2 pitches of thread, 2 different diameters of thread on them, which I thought would have been kind of handy. And because it would work on this size oil bottle here, or it'll work on these oil bottles with the larger spout. But the problem is when you have this thing on here, okay, and I'm doing this one-handed, so it makes it a little bit more difficult. But when you have this screwed on here, the problem you have is there's no way it can vent. So it seemed like it would have been the ideal thing for filling up smaller oil filler holes like on lawnmowers and things, but it turned out since it isn't vented, it really doesn't work. I found that you can make it work. I cut a slot there, I don't know if you can see it, with a knife, and it's just big enough to let the air in, and then it'll work quite well, okay? But then you have a situation where you don't want that oil bottle tipping over because the oil will leak out. So, you know, so a lot of things when you see them in the store, hey, that looks like it'd be a pretty cool thing to have in practice. It ends up maybe not as great as you expect. They also have different types of tubes that you can screw onto a oil can. This one here has got a thing where you can turn it, shut it off, and turn it on, but once again, you don't have a venting mechanism, so it really doesn't work all that well. I got a funnel there that does the same thing. You can turn on and off, and you can dump the oil into the funnel. That doesn't work too bad. These guys, you know, I guess people just don't understand that you need to have a vent in order to pour liquid out of a container, you know, and somehow the people that invented that spout, you know, got in contact with the gas can company. Now you can't even get a good gas can with a spout on anymore. Piece of junk. So that's another thing. If you have an old gas can, you know, it's made 5 years ago or more, hold on to that, because you can't buy one that is as good as one that was made 5 years ago. They're just not available. Okay, so when it comes time to changing your oil, you got various tools you need, and this is real similar to the funnels and spouts. Various tools you can use to take off an oil filter. I've had real good luck with this one. It's a strap, and you put it on a 1/2-inch ratchet handle, and you turn it, and it tightens up against the oil filter. It can do multiple sizes. It can get in fairly tight spaces. I kind of like that one. A strap wrench seems like it would be a good idea, but so often the handle, it just gets in the way of everything. You can't use it. They have these. I thought this would have been a slick thing. I bought this years ago. But so often your filter is not either one of those sizes, and this tends to slip. I'm not too impressed with that. The most recent thing I bought was this, and this works good on the oil filter on my son's 300M. You put a 3/8 ratchet on it, and when you turn it, and you can use an extension if it's far away, but when you turn it, it grabs the oil filter. That doesn't seem to work too bad on an oil filter that's really tucked in a tight spot where there isn't room to get any other type of wrench or your hand on. But one of the things that I think works the best in many situations is just save an old fan belt. Save an old V-belt, loop it around the oil filter, and you can just pull on the belt, and it works amazingly well. In a lot of situations, I haven't seen a wrench that you can buy that works as good as a old V-belt. But there are situations where that's not going to work too, particularly in tight clearance situations. But if you got an oil filter that's out in the open, that works pretty darn good for loosening them up. So let's get this Explorer up on the ramps and get the oil changed on this. One other thing, before you change your oil, of course you want to have your engine warm, because any contaminants will be in suspension, and drain your oil when it's warm after you've been running the motor. But use caution, because it's hot and it can burn you. Okay, so use a lot of caution there. You're probably better off letting the drain plug fall into the drain pan than you are to get that hot oil on yourself. And boy, if it comes down to a choice between burning yourself or letting that engine cool down a little bit, I think I'm going to let the engine cool down a little bit. Play it safe. Okay, we got our vehicle all jacked up here. We got our wheel chock on. We got our ramps are on a piece of plywood. And we also have our jack stands underneath our vehicle. So that ought to make us pretty safe. I'm sure there's some people that say, oh, the jack stands on the gravel is not the safest thing in the world, but holy cow, I think, you know, you couldn't keep everybody happy no matter what you did, but I think we did a good enough there as far as being safe is concerned. So now I'm going to pull that drain plug on this vehicle, and like I said before, it is a it's about a 16 millimeter. I also got a 5/8 wrench here, and either one should fit. So I'll pull that drain plug and we'll get the oil changed here. All right, I got the oil changed or drained on this. On this case, on this vehicle, the oil drain plug is right near the very back of the pan there. Okay. Now, when you pull the drain plug out, that oil is going to shoot out of that opening where you took the plug out. So you don't really want to have your oil drain pan directly below the spout or where the drain plug opening, because it's going to shoot away, you know, a certain amount of distance. You probably want to have just the very edge of this pan directly underneath the oil drain hole, because that oil is going to shoot that way. But obviously, when it gets close to empty, it's just going to dribble straight down. So, you know, account for that. If you put the drain pan directly, with the center of the drain plug directly beneath the drain plug, there's a good chance that spout of oil that comes out when you remove the drain plug is going to overshoot the pan and go into your driveway. Another thing you want to take into account is wind. On a windy day, particularly once the stream gets to be a little bit less strong after, like, you know, 2 or 3 quarts come out, the wind could very easily blow the oil out of the direction of the pan and blow it onto your driveway and make a mess. So this isn't too bad a job to plan on doing on a day where it's calm. You'll tend to make a little bit less of a mess. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about on this vehicle, like I said, you know, changing the oil filter, taking that off. This vehicle, it's kind of hard to reach, but in this particular situation, and this doesn't happen very often, I've had this tool for, I bet I've had this for 30 years, and it's only come in handy for me on a few vehicles. Well, it turns out that this Explorer is one of them. It fits on this filter very nice. And the thing about these oil filter removal tools is you don't really know how well one's going to work until you use it. So you gotta kind of take your chances. You know, see what you think might work good, and buy it and see if it'll work good on your car. There's a good chance you'll end up being disappointed, but I'm telling you, if you find just the right one, it's going to make this job so much easier for you. So it's probably worth, you know, buying 2 or 3 tools and having a disappointment with them before you come up with the one that's perfect for your job. And you save those other ones, and if you start working on other cars and doing other people's cars, eventually those other ones you bought come in handy. So like I say, it just isn't worth struggling. Find the best tool for the job. It's well worth it. None of these things, the good news is none of these oil filter wrenches are very expensive. So just go ahead and buy one you think is going to work, and if you're not satisfied, try something else. And those ones you bought in the past, I guarantee they're going to come in handy for something else. All right, so actually it turned out that this one didn't work anyway. But I went with this one here, and it actually worked pretty good as long as I had a 6-inch extension on it. No extension at all didn't work. Using a 3-inch didn't work because I couldn't have the wrench squarely, this filter wrench squarely on the filter. But when I went with a 6-inch extension, it worked just fine. So like I was saying before, you're going to have to probably go through a number of special oil filter wrenches before you find the one that works best on your car. But like I say, none of them were very expensive. I wouldn't have bought this one if it wasn't cheap. I saw it in the store. I thought, hey, that's pretty cheap. It looks like it might work pretty good, so I bought it. And today I'm happy that I bought it. This one here kind of disappointed me, but like I said, I haven't used it very much in 30 years. So, but it's kind of nice to find something that works. So on this particular vehicle, one other thing too here, you see that oil spot there on the driveway? Well, it's a gravel driveway, no big deal. It's not much different than having a buddy come and visit you who's got a leaky oil gasket in his car or something like that and drip some oil in your driveway. You don't tell him to never come to your house again, do you? So that's the advantage of a gravel driveway. So now we're changing this oil filter on. We're taking the oil filter off this truck, and it's a particularly troublesome spot on this truck because there's a cross member directly below this oil filter. I do not know how you could change this without making a mess. Even the old trick of punching a hole or drilling a hole in the filter first to drain the oil out wouldn't help, because even the oil you drain is going to drain right onto that cross member. There's just no way you can do it without making a mess. Okay, so then you have a filter here. Best place to do this is put it upside down in something that can collect a little bit of that oil, let it all drain out, and then then you can throw that filter away. When you take your filter off too, take a look, make sure that gasket is still on it, because you don't want to have the gasket left out on the filter boss of the truck, because if there's two gaskets on there, one from the old filter, one from the new one, it won't work properly, and it'll leak, and it's just not going to be a good thing. So make sure you have the old gasket off, okay? And what I do quite often on machinery where it's easy to see the filter is I'll scratch the mileage and the date that I changed the oil on the filter, but on cars it's underneath. It's much more difficult to crawl underneath and look at a filter on a car than it is to just look at a piece of tape on the door jamb. But a garden tractor, I'll just scratch the hours right on the filter, but on a car I'll scratch the hours on the, or write the hours with a Sharpie on a piece of masking tape and just affix that to the door jamb. I'll also do any other necessary maintenance, scheduled maintenance at the time I change oil, so it's at the same mileage, so I don't have to write down about all the things I did. If I have an oil change, I know I did all the other necessary maintenance at that time, so that's just the way I do it. But I think it's well worth it to take care of other things when you change your oil. That it's just easier to remember when you did such services. All right, let's take some time out here to talk about oil brands and types. Now, as far as brand is concerned, it doesn't make a darn bit of difference. Just get whatever's cheapest. It's fine to have your favorite brand, but you know, you'll hear these people that they'll rip on a particular type of oil and say it's no good, and come on folks, no way. These oil companies, they got millions and millions of dollars invested in making sure their oils are not going to harm a car, let alone be good for it. They're not going to take any chances on screwing that up. So any big brand name oil that you've heard of is going to be just fine, okay? Now, as far as what type of oil to get, I pretty much, if you have an old car, you know, it's quite old, who knows what its history is, particularly like if you have a car made in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Just use regular old oil. It's cheaper, and it'll be just fine. And also on old cars, you know, your hot rods and stuff, people just tend to change the oil much more often with respect to mileage. They don't put that many miles on those cars. They just drive them on weekends in the summer. So the oil's going to get changed long before it breaks down anyway. These guys who have cars like this are more changing the oil because of a time factor, not because of mileage. So, you know, in 2 years they might only put 5,000 miles on their car. Now, as far as type, this Explorer I have here, it's had synthetic blend oil in it since it was brand new. So I'm sticking with that because that's what it's had. You know, always had good luck with it. I'm not going to change now. Any new car that you get, just do what the manufacturer says. They know more about the car than you do. Regardless how much you think you know, you don't know more than the auto manufacturer. Just use what they recommend. The only thing I'd advise against, if I had an older car, you know, some kind of hot rod or, you know, fun type car made in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and it's always had, you know, conventional type oil in it, I would not switch to synthetic. I would stick with the conventional because synthetic oil has a higher flow rate than conventional oil, even within the same viscosity, which I know might sound surprising, but there is a difference between flow rate and viscosity. So if you have an older car that's always had conventional oil in it and you put synthetic oil in it, you might develop leaks, oil leaks that you didn't have before. Now here's another thing that I like to do. Once I determine the correct filter for my vehicles, I will just rip the top flap off the box and I will just staple that to my shelves here so I can very quickly get the correct number for the filter within the brand that I'm using. And I pretty much stick with the brands that our local big box store keeps in stock. So, for example, here for this Explorer here, that takes a Fram PH2. The other thing too is when I go buy filters, I don't just buy one. I'll always buy a couple, and that way, if I, whatever reason, need to change oil really quickly, I got one on hand. Just for example, this Explorer, my son's going to take that all the way down to St. Louis here, and we're up in Wisconsin, so it's about, I'd say about 360 miles one way. So I figure, might as well change the oil before we put another 700 miles on it. It's due for an oil change anyway. Once you get your oil drained out, okay, and your oil filter removed, I recommend putting the drain plug back in as soon as you're done draining that oil. Don't go think, oh, I got to go do something else first. I'll catch that later. Get this drain plug and that filter back in as soon as possible to avoid the situation where you start putting the oil in your car without this being put in, and you find out you have 2 or 3 quarts of oil laying on the ground before you remember that you forgot to put the drain plug back in. All right, so what you do is you get your drain plug threaded in, and then you tighten it up, and this doesn't need a whole lot of torque. Don't really bear down on this. It'll just be harder to take out next time. Chances are it'll be sometime when you can't find the right size wrench, so you're stuck using a crescent wrench. So don't really bear down on this, okay? Just get it about as tight as you'd get a spark plug. It doesn't have to be super tight. There's probably torque specs on it. You could look that up. I'll promise you the torque specs on it aren't very high. Now comes time to put on your oil filter, and you're going to want to put some oil on that gasket because that's going to make it seal better. So what I always do is I just barely touch it to my drain oil. Just barely touch so I don't get all over the filter, and then I'll wipe that with my finger just so that whole gasket is covered with oil. But see how I got that so I didn't get it all over the filter? If you do, you can wipe it off with a rag. But you definitely need that filter gasket coated with a thin coat of oil. Now once you get your oil filter screwed on, you only have to go hand tight on that. You don't need to use a wrench. If you are an average strength American male, hand tight is all it's going to be. If you're not quite as strong as the average American male, let's say you're a smaller framed woman, trying to do her own maintenance, you're probably going to want to go turn the filter on until you'll feel seat in the gasket, and then you might want to go about half a turn with a wrench. They will also usually in the instructions for changing oil on any particular vehicle, they'll mention this too. Sometimes I think some people say quarter turn after it meets, and some will say 3/4, but I guess it all depends on what you consider meeting the gasket. That's kind of a subjective term, but when you feel some amount of resistance, go another half turn, and you're probably going to be okay. But with most people, as tight as you can get by hand is going to be just about perfect. Oil filter in and our drain plug in. So now all we got to do is add the oil. But I thought I'd bring this up. Let's just say you were in a situation where you were changing your oil and something came up and you had to go take care of it right now. Or perhaps you didn't have any oil on hand and you thought you did, or you don't have the right weight of oil and you thought you did, but for whatever reasons you can't change the oil on that vehicle right away. I just can't making some type of note that the vehicle does not have oil in it, so someone doesn't start it. What I always do in a situation like that is I write on a piece of paper, I just stab the key right through the paper into the ignition. And because quite often you could tape it to the steering wheel, but quite often your hands might have a certain amount of grease, and tape doesn't work that good. And that's just a really easy way to do it. Just make yourself a note that says no oil, that would be obvious to anyone, and we'll say ruining the motor. So here we are, we're at the point where we have the filter on, the drain plug in. Let's get that oil put in so we don't have to risk anybody starting this up without any oil. It's here right on the oil filler cap. It says use 5W20 oil. And like I say, on any vehicle that's been treated well since the day it was brand new, keep up the same kind of care with it. Yeah, an old beater car, you can use whatever you want. It starts burning oil, you can put some heavier oil in it. But this vehicle is still here. It only has just 70,000 miles on it, and it's in pretty nice shape. And I know it was well maintained from the day it was brand new. So I'm just following the exact same type of maintenance. On an older beater, yeah, you can cut corners and use cheaper stuff. But if you got a vehicle, you know its history, and its history was it was well taken care of. It's well worth your time to continue that with you throughout the whole course of time that you own the vehicle. Now, one other thing here, when you're adding your oil, make sure your funnel is clean. If you have a funnel that you use for oil, if you don't clean it immediately after you do it, it's going to collect your dead bugs, dandelion seeds, sawdust, etc. Just like anything else, it's got oil on it. It's a good idea to clean them right away when you're done using them, but if you don't, make sure you clean it before you use it. And one other thing, remember in the beginning of this video where I wrote on the door jamb how many quarts of oil it takes? See, on this vehicle it's 6 quarts, which is really kind of strange. You wouldn't expect it. You know, if you're just guessing, you'd probably say it's 5. It's got a V8 in it. That's 4.6 liter. So what does that come out to be? I don't know, 262 or something like that cubic inches. It isn't a whole lot. You might expect, well, Ford 302 took 5, so, you know, this ought to take less, right? I mean, if anything, it would take less or the same, right? That would make sense, but it turns out it takes 6. On your door jamb, right about where you'd put your oil change stickers, just write down with Sharpie on the door jamb, you know, what size wrench your oil drain plug is, and also write down how many quarts your engine takes, so you don't have to look that up every single time you change your oil. I know what you're thinking. Did he fire 6 shots or only 5? And seeing as today's vehicles can cost $50,000 and up, and the amount of oil that any particular one takes varies amongst makes and models, you got to ask yourself, do I feel lucky? Well, rather than just rely on luck, keep track of the amount of oil that you have added to your vehicle so far. Don't just add a quart and throw that quart in the garbage can, particularly if you have done other oil changes with the exact same oil quite recently, because counting the number of oil cans in the garbage isn't going to do you any good, is it? So keep those quarts right up on top or someplace nearby where you can see them. And in this vehicle, it's 6 quarts. We'll know when we got to 6 quarts. Whereas if I threw these quart containers of oil in the garbage can, and there's already 3 empty ones of these in the garbage can already, I'm not going to have any idea how much oil I put in this. Now I can check the dipstick, but guess what? When you add a new filter, okay, before you start the engine, your engine level, oil level is going to be a little bit higher than it actually is. So then you're going to have to play a game of starting the engine, checking the oil, letting it all drain back. You're better off just keeping track of how much you added in the first place. And as long as I'm talking about that, make sure you do check your oil when you're done changing your oil and putting your new oil in, and make sure it is up to that full mark. Also, make sure you start up your vehicle and check for any leaks, and that is what we will do when we're done here. All right, we backed her off our ramps and checked our engine oil pressure while it was running. That looked good. Checked for leaks one more time. Shut her off, let the oil drain back, and the oil is right where it's supposed to be on the dipstick. So I think we can call this job done. If you liked what you saw here, I'd appreciate it if you gave me a thumbs up and shared and subscribed, watched, do all the things it takes to make this #1 channel on YouTube. And we'll see you next time here at the Fix Yourself channel.